Since we have spent a little bit of, we're talking about documents of U.S. involvement in the Argentinian dirty wars in the early 70s, and I guess this report of Radovan Karadzic being sentenced to 40 years in jail for being one of the chief architect of atrocities during the Balkan Wars in the early 90s. Should mention, and I think we may have touched on this yesterday, but it's worth discussing slightly more extensively. Dan Baum in Harper's Magazine reports that he was writing a book in the mid-90s on the drug war, or drug prohibition. And he interviewed John Ehrlichman, who was the domestic policy chief for President Richard Nixon. He ultimately went to prison as a fallout from Watergate. And he reportedly was pretty bitter about that, but this would be a sort of a weird thing to accuse somebody of if it wasn't true.
Nixon never really talked to him after that. Ehrlichman was bitter about how he was treated after that.
It was sort of thrown to the curb. But Baum asked him about the drug war that Nixon basically launched. And Ehrlichman, Baum writes, I started to ask Ehrlichman a series of earnest, wonky questions that he impatiently waved away. Quote, you want to know what this was really all about? He asked with a bluntness of a man who, after public disgrace and a stretch of federal prison, had little left to protect. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to either be against the war or black. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. I mean, he may have been bitter enough to admit that, but he did say we did. You know, it's not like that would have been a weird sort of hill to make your stand on if you were going to lie about something in the Nixon administration.
Hello, this is Mitt Romney.
Right.
Don't
exactly.
vote for Donald Trump. His racism is so atypical for our party.
Exactly.
Has no historical antecedents whatsoever. Whoa, a black guy in the room.
Now,
excuse me.
We
Who let the
certainly
dogs out?
know. We certainly know from a sort of de facto standpoint that that's what this was about, particularly in terms of black people. But it is interesting to hear one of basically the domestic policy chief of the Nixon administration concede. I don't even think conceding is the right word for this. Adamantly expressing the idea that, yeah, this wasn't a byproduct. This wasn't a bug. This was, in fact, the feature of this policy was specifically to not just and vilify, which it did, but to literally undercut their political strength by attacking the structure of their social organizations. But, you know, again, like Michael, the point made via Mitt Romney, like it's so hard to just, where did all this Trump, where did all this racism, where did all this bigotry come from in the Republic?
Complete
Just
aberration.
Completely shocking.
It's so weird.
So strange.
I think
I'm just scratching my head. Who are these Trump voters that just showed up?
And frankly, where did that policy come from? I mean, everybody could go back and read about the COINTEL program and the FBI in the 60s. I mean, to whatever degree you want to take it. I mean, there's disputes about specific incidents, but it was a conscious strategy of the FBI under Hoover to go inside, disrupt, violate the civil liberties of, and I think certainly in some cases probably kill leaders of the Black Panthers, leaders of the anti-war movement. So even before we got to this,
but that's different
policy.
Because I actually think like a guy like Hoover is a paranoid who actually thinks like these are all threats to America.
Oh no, that's the policy setup I'm getting to. The racial stuff is probably actually, I guess it is specific to Nixon kind of capitalizing on the southern southern
but
flight.
it would make sense in 1968, right? Because this is the first election you have that's a fallout from the Civil Rights Act.
Right.
And so you have this this dynamic where, you know, all of a sudden the lines are drawn differently. You know, I mean, we've talked about it on this program. FDR had to, basically traded off black people and, in some respects, women to get things like Social Security.
Right.
And LBJ basically said, okay, we're no longer going to make that trade anymore. We're going to, you know, we've had 40 years of living with that stuff. We're not going to, or I mean, not 40 years, but I'm saying like, 25 years from that time, we're done now. And I'm in by no means saying like, it was just LBJ showed up one day and was like, I'm going to do the right thing. I mean, and there's obviously a lot more complicated than that, but that was where, in the playground, you draw that line, like we're on one side, you're on the other. Well, the line just got moved. And so a bunch of people jumped over that line, the Dixiecrats, and went into the Republican Party. And then you saw that same shift too with voters. And it's all, in some respects, it's just coming home to roost 30 years later, right? I mean, you didn't start seeing this. And I mean, through Reagan, you started seeing, but Reagan Democrats were just Dixiecrat voters realigning themselves. You know, like the Reagan election was considered a realignment. I remember going to college and in 84, and my political science professors were, on day one, we're talking about there's been a realignment. And really what that was the voters falling in line with a lot of their politicians, particularly like senators and Congress people. And then ultimately we've now seen it where it's governors and state senators, et cetera, falling in line with that move. And so, if it took white people 20 some odd years in the South, racist, to realize like we're in the wrong party because the parties have shifted, you can, if that type of move takes so long, you can imagine just sort of like how long it takes to throw off the yoke of like 100 years worth of slavery.
I reckon
200 years worth of slavery.
Democrats are starting to talk about black people like humans.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm noticing a pattern here.
I'm going to wait and see and have my behavior, my affiliations align with my behavior. I'm going to give it a little more time.
I want to be 100% certain that the lines have changed here vis-a-vis black people not being murdered. But if they is, then I'm going to change.
All right, Hi, I'm Sam Seder, and this is an Ann Coulter doll.
You should not be immigrating here. Stay in your country and hate us.
For smart progressive talk and a little bit of this and even a little bit of that.
Mission accomplished.
Subscribe to our podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and like us on Facebook to get some of our best video clips.